Welcome back. I want to begin our lesson with the morning recovery prayer. Dear God, thank you for a day of sobriety yesterday. Help me to live soberly today. The title of today's lesson is Day 8, Triggers. What are they and how can I combat them? Here's what we're going to look at today. First of all, we're going to think about external triggers, then internal triggers, and finally we're going to talk about coping strategies. Well, first of all, what do I mean by the word trigger? A trigger is anything that has been repeatedly associated with acting out. It becomes what we call a conditioned stimulus that then triggers a conditioned response. You'll recognize the language from what you have read or studied about the experiments that Pavlov did with his dog. He'd ring a bell every time that he would feed the dog, and soon he could just ring the bell and that dog would begin to salivate. The bell became the trigger or the conditioned stimulus, and that caused the salivating or the conditioned response. So think about your triggers. What are the things that you associate with acting out? They can be anything. Certainly there are some things that are more sexually charged for you that trigger you more than others. But there are likely many things that can also be thought of as triggers. Some of them may be things that you've never considered as triggers. Well, first let's look at the external triggers. External triggers are anything that's outside of you that causes you to think about acting out, or it creates a strong desire to act out sexually. Basically, any person, any place, or anything can be an external trigger. Not everybody's triggered in the same way. In fact, there are some things that trigger you that may not trigger someone else. And some of the things that trigger someone else in recovery may not necessarily be triggering to you. If you're driving down the road and suddenly you see flashing lights behind you, you may simply react by pulling over and letting that emergency vehicle pass you. However, depending on your past experiences, you may instantly become fearful. Your heart rate may increase. You may begin to sweat. So what has happened? Well, you've been triggered. You've been triggered to think about some past experience where maybe you were pulled over for speeding or breaking some other traffic law, and instantly when you saw those flashing lights or you heard the siren, you wonder, hey, have I broken the law? So the flashing lights and the siren become triggers. We can divide external triggers into several categories. They may be people, places, or things, or circumstances, situations, and occasions. First, think about how people may trigger you. You may be triggered by the way people dress, or maybe just triggered by someone's hair color or some physical characteristic. Or maybe you're just physically attracted to a person, and just seeing that person, it reminds you of someone you acted out with in the past. Hopefully, you're not continuing to associate with people that you've acted out with, because continued association with people that you've acted out with in the past may prove to be a powerful and troubling trigger. Your situation may be complicated by the fact that some people you've acted out with are work associates, or maybe they're friends of your spouse, or maybe even their neighbors. So you need to think about what changes you need to make to distance yourself from people you've acted out with in the past. And maybe it's even changing a job, or maybe even involve moving. While these major changes are not things that you want to make quickly or without consulting with your sponsor or therapist, they may be ultimately necessary if you're going to stay in a healthy state of recovery. Well, another category of external triggers are places. Places where you've acted out in the past may be significant triggers, and they may include a particular place or a certain hotel, or it may include every hotel, for instance, in a particular chain. Or sometimes whole parts of town are more associated with acting out than others, because that's where the sexually oriented businesses are, maybe that's where prostitutes will hang out. And if you travel on your job and you've acted out while you're out of town, then you may be triggered by a number of things that have to do with travel. For example, airports may trigger you. Checking into a hotel room may trigger you. Just entering a hotel lobby may be a strong trigger for you. Also, under the area of external triggers are things. What are the things that trigger you? Maybe it's a clothing item that you always wore when you were acting out, or maybe it's the scent of a perfume that triggers some old memory. Anything you take in through the senses may trigger you. Things affecting any of the senses, whether it's sight or sound or smell or taste or touch, all of these can be powerful triggers. You may be triggered by, for example, a sign from a legitimate massage therapist because you've acted out by seeking out sexual massages in the past. The last category in external triggers are situations, circumstances, and occasions. For example, if you know that you have a business trip coming up and you used to act out on business trips, just the thought of that trip approaching may trigger you. And if you're going to be home alone, then just the thought of having that time to yourself can be triggering. Stress or conflict involving your job may also be triggering. Maybe in the past, rather than deal with conflict and stress in a productive way, maybe you medicated your feelings by acting out. Well, now, anytime there's stress on the job, you're tempted to act out. Maybe you look for something on your computer to take your mind off the current situation, or you fantasize about how you can come up with an excuse to leave the office so that you can act out. Another significant trigger is conflict with your partner. In the past, maybe when the conflict would come, that would give you an excuse to act out. And now each time there's a conflict, you may be tempted to run away and go act out to get away from the tension. Now it's time to complete your external triggers worksheet. Think about all of the external triggers that you've experienced. What people, places, and things, and circumstances or occasions trigger you. Pause the video now and make a thorough list of your external triggers. Now let's think about internal triggers. Internal triggers may include thoughts, feelings, moods, and emotions. For example, boredom may be a trigger. If you're bored, you may look for something that'll lift your spirits. You may turn to some sexual behavior as a temporary relief for boredom. Memories of the past acting out behavior that you've been involved in can be triggering, and also fantasies can be triggering. In fact, sexual fantasies are particularly dangerous as you think about past acting out experiences. Depression and anxiety are also powerful internal triggers. Feeling anxious or depressed is what causes some people to escape to acting out. Other emotional states like anger can also be triggering. What are your internal triggers? Do you have a picture of them? Pause the video now and complete the worksheet for your internal triggers. Take all the time that's necessary so that you make a complete list. Well, if we just left it there and with identifying triggers and didn't go further, this lesson would be incomplete. So let's spend a few minutes talking about coping strategies. Now, these are different from the tools that you're going to be learning about later on days 18 and 19. These coping strategies are things that you can do right now to counter the effects of a trigger. Here's just a few coping strategies. You can listen to music. You can work a puzzle, or you can phone a friend. There's a number of things that you can do, like take a walk or sing to yourself, and many, many other things. Coping strategies are anything that you use to help you deal with triggers. If you'll look on pages 58 and 59 of our text, then you're going to find a list of other coping strategies. Well, now it's time for your assignment. Read the chapter for day 8 in 30 Days to Hope and Freedom. Do the last worksheet for this chapter and come up with a list of coping strategies that work for you. And of course, you're going to want to journal about your recovery today, as well as begin and end each day with your recovery prayers. Well, let's end this lesson with the evening prayer for recovery. Dear God, thank you for a day of sobriety today. Help me to live soberly tomorrow. And I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow.